On June 19, 2012, 5 climbers from Waco, Texas decided to summit the treacherous Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier stands out as one of the most sought-after and popular climbs globally. Every year, over 12,000 individuals are drawn to the breathtaking beauty of this heavenly mountain. These climbers knew what they were getting into, but they couldn't have fathomed how unlucky they were about to become. Right when they were about to descend, one of the climbers slipped and fell into a bottomless crevasse. The very crevasse that the group was trying to avoid. What followed was a chain reaction of horrifying moments. What befell these climbers, who faced their journey with such determination? You might want to stay till the very end of this video to witness one of the biggest disasters that transpired on Mount Rainier. Reaching 4,392 meters high in the skies of the Pacific Northwest, Mount Rainier is a familiar sight in western Washington. It's the biggest mountain in both the Cascade Range and Washington State, known locally as Tahoma or Tacoma. This massive volcano has 2 large craters on top, and they stay snow and ice-free because of the heat from below, even hosting the world's biggest glacier cave. What makes Rainier really cool is its glaciers. There are 26 big glaciers and some snowfields. Climbing it can be a challenge, but it's a great practice for climbers who dream of tackling the highest peaks like Everest. Rainier is like a practice summit for big dreams. For the 5 Texan climbers, climbing Rainier was supposed to be a warm-up, as they had greater plans of climbing Mount Denali, the tallest mountain in North America. Instead of choosing other paths, they opted for the Emmons Glacier route, a challenging climb without marked trails. This route spans about 10,000 vertical feet and requires essential alpine and climbing skills for a safe journey. While there are some technical challenges, the overall experience provides a unique view of the mountain's history and past mining activity. The group of climbers consisted of Stacy Wren, a senior at Baylor University, Stuart Smith, a Waco attorney with climbing experience on some of the world's tallest peaks, including Mount Everest, his niece, Noel Smith, Ross Van Dyke, Baylor's assistant director of admission counseling who had attempted Mount Rainier before, and Claire McDonald. On the first night of the 2-day climb, they passed Camp Sherman and camped on a glacier above it at a location called Sherman Flats. The next morning, the group started their climb at 2:30 a.m. after waking up at 1:30 a.m. The ascent was challenging, featuring icy conditions and steep inclines ranging from 40 to 50 degrees. The day before our attempt to reach the summit at camp, the view of the summit was clear, and visualizing ourselves standing at the top filled us with excitement. Despite some challenges like illness and other issues, our team was bonding effectively. 4 of us were gearing up for the summit push. Claire McDonald shared her thoughts on the experience that day. Now, did you know that Mount Rainier is identified as a decade volcano by the International Association of Volcanology and Chemistry, IAVCEI. It signifies its substantial threat to life and property in the surrounding area. Being a stratovolcano, Mount Rainier is prone to highly explosive eruptions. During such eruptions, it can release massive columns of ash, reaching far into the sky. Additionally, these explosions may generate pyroclastic flows, swift combinations of hot gas and rock fragments that rush down the volcano's slopes like a blazing avalanche, causing extensive destruction in their path. Mount Rainier's volcanic activity can lead to the rapid melting of its numerous glaciers. The resulting steam expansion can trigger a forceful explosion. This, in turn, has the potential to induce fast-moving mud flows known as lahars, which are highly destructive. Experts suggest that a future eruption of Mount Rainier could result in even more significant damage than the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. Coming back to our climbers, Claire felt unwell during the ascent and had to turn back. Van Dyke and Stuart Smith descended with her, and after their return, the rest continued toward the summit. The climb progressed smoothly as all of them displayed excellent teamwork. Upon reaching the summit, they joyfully celebrated with Snickers bars and took numerous photos to capture the memorable moment. However, a more significant challenge awaited them: the descent. Despite their enthusiasm for a warm bowl of soup and commemorating their achievement back at camp, an unexpected problem arose. Unbeknownst to them, adverse weather was approaching. The weather front, initially predicted for later that night or the following day, arrived unexpectedly 12 hours earlier. The temperature drastically dropped, turning the once soft snow, ideal for climbing on the ascent, into hard and icy terrain due to rainfall at higher elevations. Descending became a daunting task, turning the journey into a nightmarish experience. During the ascent, the team had successfully crossed the Bergschrund, a sizable crevasse with a narrow snow bridge. However, the shifting weather conditions forced them to seek an alternative route to navigate the Bergschrund. As everything was rapidly freezing around them, It resulted in an abrupt shift to a significantly steeper section of the glacier with an approximately 50-degree incline and a horrifying drop of 3,000 feet or around 900 meters below them. We had just reached the top, and we were around 1,000 feet below it. We were moving sideways because you're not allowed to put flags on the Emmons Glacier. I was in front, leading the group, as we tried to go around a big crack in the ice. Stuart Smith mentioned that it seemed like there was a bit more than 100 yards left and then we would be out of danger. For safety, they had placed pickets at specific distances along the route in case someone fell during the climb. They were aware that this part of the climb was risky, so taking precautions was important. Climbing Mount Rainier is tough. You need to be physically fit and comfortable with things like climbing on mixed terrain, moving through icy cracks, and crossing glaciers. You should feel safe during the climb without causing problems for yourself or your group. If you're at an intermediate climbing level, you're usually ready to try reaching the top of Rainier. You must know how to use climbing gear like ice axes, ropes, and crampons. Being able to work well in a team using ropes is important. Learning how to rescue someone from a crevasse is also useful. Before attempting Rainier, it's common to practice on a smaller mountain like Mount Baker. This helps climbers get ready for the challenges of Rainier, including dealing with environmental dangers, using tools, coping with high altitude, overcoming personal fears, and being ready for sudden changes in weather. To prepare physically, it's a good idea to exercise regularly for a few months before your climb. Activities like cycling, running, and hiking will make you healthier and better able to handle the climb. Stuart Smith, leading the group, finished crossing the dangerous section of the glacier. They reached a safer part, and the rest of the team followed. Unfortunately, they had used up all the pickets, placing them in the front, and none were left for the back. Despite this, the group collectively decided not to use another picket and instead relied on careful movement and retrieving their gear. Claire McDonald, the fifth team member, watched their descent from the base camp using her binoculars. She had been injured a couple of months earlier and couldn't train as she wanted. She said, "I woke up hopeful that morning, but I also didn't sleep well. My stomach was upset, so I hiked down to the ranger station, and they let me use some powerful binoculars. Through the binoculars, she witnessed the upcoming disaster. Stacy, Stuart, Ross, and Noel retrieved the last piece of equipment and started their descent. After a few steps, Stacy tried to place her right crampon on the surface but found it didn't provide enough traction. Despite attempting to use her ice axe to stop the slide, the icy snow was too hard, and she realized she had no control over their downward movement. I remember jumping out in the self-arrest pose. I barely got my axe in before we were ripped from the slope. I felt like I was pulled off the mountain. When I fell, I immediately thought about my wife and said, 'Hey, this is it. This is how I am going to die,' Ross said. Unbeknownst to them, the bergschrund they had been trying to traverse was just beneath them. It was concealed from view. As they tumbled through the air, they realized that this was the end. This is how they would meet their untimely demise. The impact was quite brutal as Stacy collided with the other side of the crevasse and everything went dark as her head snapped back. I think I knew right away what was happening and how bad it was because they fell very quickly. They stopped falling. I didn't understand how they stopped falling," Claire said. 20 minutes later, Stacy slowly regained consciousness and found herself lying on her back in the snow, gradually reacquainting herself with her surroundings. She was relieved to discover that she was still alive, secured by her harness. Beside her lay Stuart Smith, with their bodies entangled in the rope. Peering downward, she spotted one of her companions, hanging approximately 60 feet or 18 meters below, also connected by the rope. However, the whereabouts of the third team member remained uncertain. Stacy noticed that the two ends of the rope led uphill, and without hesitation, she began ascending, although she no longer had an ice axe at her disposal. With unwavering determination to avoid another fall, she clawed her way up the slope using her fingernails to dig into the icy surface. Upon reaching the brink of a narrow crevasse, she saw Noel Smith, who was dangling inside the crevasse. Noel had slipped into it during the fall, but not completely. This effectively halted the group's fall and ultimately saved their lives. However, Noel was in a state of distress, uttering incoherent cries, and her harness was gradually slipping down her leg, putting everyone at risk of plummeting into the bottomless depths of the crevasse. Stacy knew that Noel was the anchor for the rope and the lifeline for the entire team. A sense of urgency took over her. The other climbers were in an extremely vulnerable state with limited responsiveness. Stacy was confronted with the immediate and daunting task of formulating a plan for their escape from this disaster. Meanwhile, Peter Ramos, a Montana mountain climbing guide, and climbing partner Jeff Van Pevenage, along with their party, had just summited Mount Rainier. Peter said, "So I had just submitted Liberty Ridge on Mount Rainier with a friend of mine, and we were exhausted and ready for a break. But then I looked over towards the Emmons Glacier and I saw some bodies lying down on their backs with a knee up. I thought, oh, that's an interesting way to rest. I kept looking over towards this group, and once we moved towards them, we realized that it was no longer a rest." On the other hand, Claire McDonald was horrified as she looked on through her binoculars down at the ranger station. "I said something pretty quickly to the 2 rangers I was with and gave them the binoculars, and they weren't sure. But I just kept telling them, no, they fell. They wanted to wait for a while and see if they moved, and nobody moved for a while. That's when they started making radio calls and doing amazing things that they did that day." Upon regaining consciousness, Ross Van Dyke found himself disoriented, struggling to make sense of his surroundings. He detected distant voices, but his senses had gone haywire, much like that of a person in a movie after a heavy explosion. Initial silence followed by a ringing sensation, gradually giving way to clarity. As he surveyed his surroundings, he saw no one in his vicinity, but then he heard a familiar voice calling out his name. Gazing upward, he spotted Stacy. "You have to come up here. I can't explain, but you have to come to me," she yelled. Van Dyke dragged himself up the mountain with a dislocated pelvis. He didn't know exactly at the time what had happened to him. He thought that he had broken his femur. As adrenaline rushed through his body, he couldn't feel any pain. He proceeded to use his one good leg and the crampon that was on that leg and his ice axe to climb up what may have been 75, maybe 100 feet to where Stacy was. As he passed Stewart, he thought that he was dead. On the other end, calls from the ranger station were made to David Bulger, a U.S. Army Reserve Chinook helicopter pilot. When I first got the call, I wasn't aware of how dire the situation was with the climbers, or how bad the weather was becoming. By the time I got to the unit and started doing the planning and got the word around, I realized it was going to be a very challenging scenario. The mission to rescue the climbers on Mount Rainier contained 2 pilots in the front seats, accompanied by a flight engineer responsible for external assessments. Furthermore, there was a crew chief overseeing the winch operation and members from the National Park Service who were integral to the mission. These National Park Service personnel had been picked up at the base of Mount Rainier to aid in the rescue operation. In addition, the Madigan Army Hospital sent 2 paramedics to reinforce their team. Meanwhile, Peter Ramos arrived at the location of the fall, a journey that took him and his climbing partner 45 minutes. As a seasoned mountain guide and an expedition nurse, Ramos swiftly sprang into action. Ross, on the other hand, was stunned by what had just happened. Ramos saw that 4 individuals were present at the scene. Noel was trapped within a crevasse, while 2 others were positioned on a snow bridge just above Noel in the crevasse. Further down the slope, Stuart Smith was lying on his back approximately 25 feet away. Once the rangers arrived, Peter turned to them and told them, "This is your rescue and this is your mountain. You tell me where you need me." They requested him to provide medical assistance. Peter proceeded to check on each individual and evaluate their injuries. One of the climbers seated nearby had a broken leg, a broken arm, and a broken back. The person Peter was attending to at that moment had a collapsed lung and 2 broken legs. The other climber had a dislocated hip and a brain bleed, and he believed that she also had a broken back. The subsequent day unfolded with challenging conditions as all the injured, accompanied by rangers, confronted the rescue. The Chinook helicopter hoisted the injured one by one to safety. Exhausted, terrified, and haunted by the recent ordeal, all of them had contemplated surrendering to the mountain. Yet the rangers, with unwavering encouragement, urged her to dig deep within herself, emphasizing the imperative to persevere. Among the rescue climbers was Nick Hall, an elite member who had undergone extensive training in various fields, including alpine mountaineering, aviation, technical rope rescue, avalanche forecasting, backcountry skiing, and emergency medical services. As the rescue sled was coming down from the Chinook, Peter saw Nick Hall reaching for the sled and giving the okay that the cable was clear to bring in. The next moment, something horrifying happens. Nick Hall falls down. Peter saw him hurtling down the slope at high speed. Peter averted his gaze. He couldn't watch the remainder of the incident. Ranger Nick Hall, age 33, fell about 2,500 feet down Mount Rainier's Emmons Glacier on June 21st during the rescue operation. Hall didn't respond to communication attempts and remained motionless after the fall. Climbing rangers reached Hall several hours later during the rescue but found him deceased. All 4 climbers were successfully rescued and taken to a hospital, with some sustaining serious injuries. The rescue mission, despite its risks and the sad loss of Nick Hall, eventually came to an end. Due to challenging weather conditions, including heavy cloud cover and several feet of new snow, the park faced difficulties recovering Hall's remains in the subsequent days. Despite these challenges, his body was eventually retrieved. A year later, Stacy Wren reflects on the June 21, 2012 incident, carrying the memories daily. Grateful for survival, she owes an immeasurable debt to Nick Hall and her rescuers. Noel Smith, inspired by Hall's passion, plans to return to the Cascade Range. Team leader Stuart Smith, Noel's uncle, prefers not to discuss the climb publicly. He and Noel have talked, emphasizing the importance of learning from the accident. Ross Van Dyke, however, is still connected to the mountain in various ways. He frequently apologizes, contemplating how things could have unfolded differently. Van Dyke sold his expensive climbing boots, donating the proceeds to the church. He sent a letter to Hall's parents, uncertain if they received it. Although he keeps his Rainier climbing pass, he has no intentions of climbing again. Daily, he questions why he survived, altering aspects of his routine and perspective. Watching an online memorial for Hall, he grapples with the realization that Hall was someone's friend, son, and brother. Expressing gratitude and remorse to the family becomes a challenge. Van Dyke acknowledges that if they hadn't been on the mountain that day, Hall would still be alive.